Hello and welcome to Theater Operations Unleashed, the monthly show that explores the ins and outs of theater operations, management, facilities, and design. I'm your host, Raymond Kent. In each episode, we will be focusing on management, operations, design, trends, and best practices in the performing arts. I hope to bring you both insights from my 4 decades in the industry, as well as engaging conversations with theater professionals about the challenges and rewards of their work. We'll also cover a wide range of topics from budgeting and scheduling to marketing and audience development, theater technology, and many other related topics. Whether you're a theater maker yourself or just interested in the industry, I hope you'll find this podcast informative and inspiring. So sit back, relax, or lean in, and let's dive into the world of theater. Welcome back to Theater Operations Unleashed. Today we're going to continue our deep dive into accessibility in the performing arts. If you've been following this series so far, you know we're building a foundation, not just of design principles, but of history, culture, and law. Today's episode is all about the legislative landscape, the rules, the standards, the legal scaffolding that shapes every accessible route, every wheelchair space, every assisted listening system, every captioning requirement. And here's the thing. Whether you're an architect, a production manager, a theater operator, or an arts administrator, the law is already in the room with you. Now, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm going to be giving you some of the legal statistics that are readily available to the public. I always advise people that if you have questions, talk to an attorney. When you sit down to design a new venue or renovate an old one, federal disability law is sitting right beside you, determining widths, slopes, heights, clearances, and obligations. But it wasn't always that way. So today we're going to walk through how we got from no standards at all to the complex, evolving legal framework we work within today. Let's start with a simple but staggering truth. For most of American history, there were no accessibility standards. None. No minimum doorway widths, no ramp slopes, no requirements for captioning, assisted listening, or accessible restrooms. The built environment, including theaters, was designed for a very narrow idea of the human body. If you didn't fit that template, you were effectively shut out. And even architects who wanted to design accessible buildings had no shared technical vocabulary, no definitions, no measurements, no guidance. That changed in 1961. When ANSI and the National Easter Seal Society published the first accessibility standard. That's the ANSI standard A117.1, making buildings and facilities accessible to and usable by the physically handicapped. It was voluntary, it had no legal force, but it was revolutionary. For the first time, the field had answers to questions like, how wide should a doorway be? What's the maximum slope of a ramp? How much turning radius does a wheelchair need? It was the beginning of a shared language, the seed of everything that came later. But voluntary standards only go so far, and in the 1960s, most architects ignored them. Most clients didn't ask for them, and most performing arts venues built in that era still reflect that reality today. The first real legal shift came in 1968. When then-President Lyndon Johnson signed the Architectural Barriers Act, also known as the ABA. This was the first federal law to say, essentially, if the federal government builds it, funds it, or leases it, it must be accessible. The scope was limited. It didn't apply to private theaters or commercial venues, but it established a principle that had never been written into law before. Accessibility is not charity. It's a requirement. The ABA also created a problem. 4 different federal agencies wrote 4 different sets of standards. They didn't match. They didn't align. And they were hard to enforce. Sounds like a lot of the government we know. So in 1973, Congress created the Architectural and Transportation Barriers Compliance Board. Today it's known as the U.S. Access Board, to coordinate and enforce accessibility standards. This board still exists today, and its work underpins the ADA standards we use now. The ABA wasn't perfect. It had weak enforcement, no private right of action, but it was the first time the federal government said, we have a responsibility to build access into the world we create. If the ABA was the first step, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act was the earthquake. 35 words that changed everything. No otherwise qualified individual with a disability shall, solely by reason of her or his disability, be excluded from participation in any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. For the first time, disability discrimination was treated like race or sex discrimination. And the performing arts, this was huge. That meant if you received any federal money from the NEA, NEH, IMLS, or any federal agency, you were now required to make your programs accessible and make your facilities accessible, conduct self-evaluations, create transition plans, designate a 504 coordinator, and establish grievance procedures. This was the beginning of organizational accessibility planning, something many arts organizations still struggle with today. But Section 504 didn't take effect immediately. The regulations were delayed for 4 years, and it took the 1977 sit-ins, including the 28-day occupation of the San Francisco Federal Building, to force the government to act. When the regulations finally went into effect, they set the stage for the next major leap. In 1990, the ADA changed the landscape forever. Unlike Section 504, which applied only to federally funded organizations, the ADA applied to almost every employer, every state and local government, every place of public accommodation, including theaters, concert halls, and performance venues. And the ADA is divided into 5 titles, but 3 matter most for the arts. Title 1, the employment. This covers hiring, firing, job assignments, training, and accommodations. It applies to administrative staff, production crews, front of house teams, and yes, performers. The key concept is the interactive process, a collaborative conversation about what accommodations are needed to perform essential functions of the job. Title 2, State and Local Government. This covers public universities, municipal theaters, school auditoriums, and any government-run venue. It introduces the idea of program access. Not every building must be accessible, but the program as a whole must be. And Title 3, Public Accommodations. This is the big one for private arts organizations. It requires no discrimination, removal of architectural barriers when readily achievable, compliance with ADA standards for new construction and alterations, effective communication, including assisted listening and captioning, and readily achievable is not a one-time test. As your resources grow, so do your obligations. The ADA standards, especially the 2010 standards for accessible designs, are the technical heart of accessibility. For performing arts venues, they cover wheelchair seating counts and dispersal, companion seating, sightlines over standing spectators, accessible routes, assisted listening systems, restroom design, ticket counters, stage access in certain contexts, and so on and so on and so on. The sightlines requirement alone has generated years of litigation, and for good reason. Designing accessible sightlines in raked seating is genuinely challenging. Standards don't solve every problem. They don't fully address backstage access. They don't cover technical theater spaces well. They don't guarantee universal design. But they set the floor, the minimum legal requirement. And as you know, the floor is not the ceiling. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, Supreme Court decisions narrowed the ADA's definition of disability so much that many people with significant impairments were no longer covered. Congress responded with the ADA Amendments Act of 2008, which broadened the definition and made clear that disability should be interpreted in favor of coverage. This matters for arts organizations because it expands who is entitled to accommodations, especially in employment. As the arts moved online, especially during the recent COVID pandemic, accessibility moved with it. Section 508 requires federal agencies to use accessible technology, and its standards have become the de facto benchmark for web accessibility across the nonprofit sector. Courts increasingly hold that inaccessible websites violate the ADA, and the DOJ's 2024 rule adopting the WCAG 2.1 AA for public entities is reshaping expectations for everyone. If your ticketing system, website, or streaming platform isn't accessible, you're already behind. In the 21st Century Communications and Video Accessibility Act requires captioning for online video content that was captioned on TV. For performing arts organizations that streamed performances or educational content, this is a major obligation and one many organizations still, unfortunately, overlook. Two federal incentives, however, do help organizations invest in accessibility. If you're not familiar with them, please look them up. The Disabled Access Credit, up to $5,000 per year for small businesses, and the barrier removal deduction of up to $15,000 per year for businesses of any size. These are underused in the arts. So if you're renovating, upgrading, or improving access, talk to a tax professional, talk to your design professional, talk to an attorney. See how you can access these dollars. So that's the legislative landscape. It's a very narrow slice that I've given you here today, but it is the floor we all stand on. Here's the truth. Compliance is not the goal. Inclusion is the goal. The law gives us the minimum. The work of the arts, the work of culture demands more. In the next episodes, we're going to move from the legal framework into the practical world. How to design accessible stage houses, how to build inclusive backstage environments, how to create accessible programs and policies, how to move from compliance to belonging. This is Theater Operations Unleashed. Let's keep building stages where everybody can belong. Thanks for taking the time today to listening to Theater Operations Unleashed. We hope to see you next month.